G'day guys, nbduckman here, and welcome to a very special episode of Collector's Corner. I know it's been a while since I've made one of these episodes, but I figured I'd start 2019 off with a bang. This here is a Nintendo 64DD, one of the rarest Nintendo consoles ever made, with estimates around 15,000 units being produced, and only in Japan. These are so difficult to come across. You may remember me saying that I was looking for one in Japan and wasn't able to come across one, but funnily enough, a close friend here in the same state as me, South Australia, was able to sell me his. So I've finally been able to come across one. I'm looking forward to sharing it with you guys. So just a quick apology. I'm still trying to work out the best way to film these episodes. I don't have a tripod set up. I'm thinking that's probably the way to go. And I think I also would like to buy a microphone just to get better audio on these episodes. But the one improvement you will see from the past episode is that this is in 4K 60 FPS, so at least the visual aspect of these videos will be good, but that's something I'm looking to try and improve in the future. So with all that aside, let's get right into it. So this is a Nintendo 64DD. If you're not too familiar with what that is, I'll briefly explain. So this is the actual 64DD itself, and what you would basically do, you would plug this unit into the bottom of your conventional Nintendo 64 console. I'm sure a lot of you watching this would be familiar with that. And what this was, is it was a disk drive. That's what the DD stands for. And so instead of using cartridges like you would in a regular Nintendo 64, you would insert discs in. And these discs had a higher capacity, and the hardware in here was also much better. So the idea was that you'd have larger and better games on the 64DD. Now, unfortunately, the 64DD was actually a bit of a failure, but luckily for us, we're all about failures here over on Collector's Corner. But there were a number of reasons for this. One of the reasons was, you can see here, the box is actually labelled randnet starter kit. It does say 64DD on it, but it's primarily branded with this randnet name, and you can see it appears here as well. And basically the reason for that is the 64DD was actually part of a subscription service. It wasn't really just something you bought. You had to pay a monthly fee and subscribe to it. And subscriptions were just not a thing back at the time that this was released, so it didn't really take off. Now, when it did start to fail, they did end up boxing up some of these in 64DD boxes and selling them standalone in shops. But those boxes are actually much rarer, and they weren't the original package that they came in. What you're looking at is the original box that you would have received a 64DD in. This is one of the kits that you would have received if you subscribed. When you subscribed, this was what they sent you to begin with, hence why it's called the starter kit. But every month they would continue to send you more games for the DD, and these were the discs that would be inserted into the actual unit itself. I'll show you some of these a bit later in the video. But let's say you've subscribed to randnet and this shows up in your mail. What do you actually get? Well, as I mentioned before, you get the actual 64DD unit itself, but you also get a few other things. So you can see here, you get a modem. That's because the 64DD was actually an online enabled console. In that regard, it was quite ahead of its time. Obviously, this wasn't really a common thing up until sort of the PS3 and Xbox 360 sort of showed up. So this was quite ahead of its time. Additionally, you got the randnet disc, which I'll talk a bit about later, and you got a cable that is just basically an Ethernet cable to plug into the modem. So what I'll do now is I'll open the box up so you can actually see what was inside. I will mention that what you'll see inside is not exactly what you would have seen if you open one of these brand new. The DD that I bought had a few differences, which I'll explain along the way. So here we've got the 64DD brochure, instruction manual rather, and there's also a quick start guide in there as well. They're all in Japanese. Unfortunately, I can't read Japanese, so they're not terribly useful to me. But that I should mention that this was only available in Japan, so that's why they are in Japanese. In the actual box, you would get the modem. So we'll pull that out and have a bit of a look at it. You can see it's just a Nintendo 64 cartridge. So you would actually plug this into the Nintendo 64, which itself would be plugged into the top of the 64DD. And on this side over here, you can see there's your cable connector, so you just plug that straight into your phone line. Here is the cable that you would use to do that. And down here is where things get a bit different. So what would normally have been in here, if this was a brand new 64DD, is this. So this is the randnet disc. This is basically the home menu, effectively. It was on its own disc, but this was the disc that you would use to basically get started with your 64DD. When I obtained my 64DD, what was in there was this cardboard. And what this cardboard actually is, and there's also a disc here, which I'll talk about in a moment. What was in this cardboard is a copy of Doshin the Giant, which is one of the more well-known games on the 64DD. If we look over here, this is a copy of Doshin the Giant. This is what it looks like in its cover. But when you first obtained it through the subscription service, it would be wrapped in sort of like a cardboard, almost like a gift box. And luckily, this was inside the 64DD box. It would not have come like this, but I was very fortunate to have this because inside this cardboard, cut out for the game, there's a little bit of artwork there. So that's quite cool. But like I said, it's not got anything to do with the starter kit, but it was in my starter kit, so very cool. Yeah, next we'll take off this cardboard layer and see what's underneath. Before I take off the cardboard layer, I forgot to mention that there was a disc in there. So this is actually a loose copy of Doshin the Giant. So when I bought this 64DD, it came with a number of games, one of which was this resealed Doshin the Giant, which I'm assuming has a disc in it. But then it also had a loose disc copy of Doshin the Giant too. So we've got two copies of that, which is quite nice. So if we remove this cardboard layer, there it is, the beast itself, the 64DD. You can see on the top, it's not really that much to look at. It's pretty plain and there's not really much going on. That's because this is actually where the Nintendo 64 would sit. The bottom of the Nintendo 64 plugs into this adapter here, so you wouldn't actually see this part in general use. We'll take that out in a bit and have a better look at it, but there's also a few other things in here. So in here you'll see this. You may have seen one of these before. This is used to remove the memory pack on a Nintendo 64. You need a memory pack to use the 64DD. If you don't have one, you cannot use your 64DD. It won't function without one. All Nintendo 64s will have a jumper pack installed if you don't have a memory pack. It's sort of like a dummy pack that you need to have. That slot needs to be filled. There needs to be something in there for it to work. But some games and the 64DD actually require a memory pack. And over here, this is where the memory pack would usually be packaged. However, as I said, my DD had a few differences, and so when I opened this up, I noticed that there was just the original jumper pack here, no memory pack. Luckily, I already had a memory pack, so that was no problem. Now I've just got an excess of jumper packs. So let's have a look at the 64DD unit itself. So the most obvious thing you'll notice when you first see it is the disc slot at the front and the eject button there. You've also got this little access light. This light only comes on when the 64DD is actually reading from a disc. It won't come on when you first power on the 64DD. This confused me a bit at first. I'll show you how it works when you put a disc into the slot. So here we've got the F-Zero X expansion kit. Simply plug it in like this. You'll hear the click, and there you go. And then to eject it, you just press the button, and you hear one of the coolest eject sounds ever. Very cool. Never gets old. On the top of the 64DD, not a huge amount to look at, as I said. You've got this caution warning here saying to be careful when connecting the actual Nintendo 64 to the 64DD, because there is in fact a little plastic cover on the Nintendo 64, and if you don't take it off, you're just going to smash things together. This is the actual connector itself. The only other thing worth mentioning on here is these screws. So when you actually put the Nintendo 64 on top of the DD, you actually have to screw these screws into it. So once the full unit is assembled, the two consoles actually won't separate because they're actually connected together. And I guess this is to stop them sort of accidentally coming apart. The other thing on the top of the 64DD is this little line. And I still haven't quite worked out what this is for. It's obviously a little slot for a cable to come through. I'm assuming that it's for the phone line if you're using the 64DD modem, but why you'd want to do this, I'm really not too sure. But there it is. There's not really much to look at on the sides, some vents there, but that's really about it on the sides and the front. So underneath the DD, you've got the little sticker that has all the information there. You've got the actual handles for those screws I was mentioning before. So once you've attached the 64DD, you simply screw these to screw it in. And that's pretty much it. I should point out that under here is the serial number of the 64DD. Each 64DD has a unique serial number. And so you can actually use these serial numbers to track who owns each DD. And there is in fact a forum page where all these DDs are tracked. When you own a DD, it's sort of a choice whether you want to be listed there or not. I'm not sure whether I want to be listed there or not yet because, I mean, one of the side effects of being listed there is you'll get a lot of people contacting you to buy the 64DD, which I'm not sure if I'm up for yet. So I'm going to leave this a secret for now, but if I ever do reveal it, I'll add it to the description of this video. So you've got your 64DD out of the box. Here it is, looking nice, but it's definitely incomplete. What we need to do is put our Nintendo 64 on top. Now, it's probably worth mentioning that you have to use a Japanese Nintendo 64. The 64DD was never released outside of Japan, and if you try to use any other Nintendo 64, it just won't work. You can use any color of Nintendo 64 you like, but the 64DD actually only came in this grey colour. So luckily here we have a matching colour Japanese Nintendo 64, which will do the job. So if we flip over the Nintendo 64, you can see there's this external port here. Every region of Nintendo 64 actually has this, but obviously it was only ever useful in Japan because the only accessory that ever plugged into here was the 64DD. So it's sort of it's on every other console, but it's never used. So what we do, we just take that cover off, and we take it over to our 64DD, and it literally, I can do this one-handed, just plugs in like that. Then what you want to do is flip the unit over, and then, as I mentioned before, there's these little screw tabs. And what you want to do, you just want to screw those in like this, and then go over to the other one and do the same. And there you go, the 64DD is now screwed into the Nintendo 64, and you should be able to tip the thing, and you'll notice it doesn't fall off the bottom. So there it is, our 64DD unit is now assembled and ready to go. So let's plug it in and see how it works. Okay, so we've moved our 64DD unit over here next to the CRT. We've plugged it in via the video cable, and it's also powered. So if we go ahead and turn that on, we'll see the light comes on there. And there's the 64DD menu. It's quite a nice menu actually. You've got the Nintendo 64 logo there, and you can see Mario poking his head out. There's a few little animations that it'll run through while it's waiting at the menu there. So it's quite a nice touch, and as someone who loves Mario, it's really cool to see these unique animations that are probably quite uncommon. So before I had a DD, one thing that always confused me is how it worked in terms of starting up a game. How did the console know to load from the cartridge slot up there or to load from the disc? And basically the way it works is this. If you've got a DD hooked up to your Nintendo 64 and you've got a game in the cartridge slot, it will load the game first. So to get to the DD menu, you actually have to have no game in the cartridge slot. Then, if you start the 64DD with no disc in, you'll get this menu, but you can actually put discs in while the 64DD is on, unlike the regular Nintendo 64. So if we go ahead and push this disc in, we'll see that we actually start to load up the game while the thing is already running. And so this is Doshin the Giant we're starting up here, and you can see that started fine. So when I was originally planning this video, I was contemplating whether it was worth showing all the games running on the 64DD, but I don't really have a great mechanism of recording them, and you can find plenty of videos of these running on 64DDs all over YouTube. So what I decided instead is I'll just show off the games that I have managed to obtain. I bought them from the same person who sold me the unit itself, and there's some interesting things to say about some of these games, so we'll go over them one by one. So it's also worth mentioning that the 64DD is quite an uncommon console. Only 15,000 units were made, which is not very many. Generally Nintendo consoles, the manufacturer numbers are in the millions, so to have only 15,000 in existence is quite a small number. As a result of there not being that many of them, there are also very few games for the DD. you may be surprised to know that there were only 10 games released for the 64DD. In front of you, you're looking at 8 of them. There's 2 that I don't have. One of them is a golf game, and the other one is a sequel to Doshin the Giant, which I mentioned earlier. But both of these are really uncommon, and they are quite expensive and hard to come by. And at this point, I just really don't have any interest in trying to track them down. It's also worth mentioning that there was also a demo disc released for the 64DD, which is incredibly rare. And it was basically a demo of Doshin the Giant, I'm pretty sure. Now, while that disc is quite rare, funnily enough, the person that sold me the 64DD told me that when they came across the 64DD, it actually had that demo disc in the slot of the 64DD, but they ended up deciding to sell it because it was worth so much. So even though I don't have that as part of my collection, it's interesting to know that my DD has once had that cartridge in the slot. So for those of you who are Mario fans, such as myself, the most interesting games on the 64DD are the Mario artist games. There are 4 of these games. You've got the Paint Studio, the Talent Studio, the Polygon Studio, and the Communication Kit. Now I'll just briefly explain what each of these are. Paint Studio is basically a enhanced version of Mario Paint, if you ever played that on the Super Nintendo. It's really a lot of fun because I was a big fan of Mario Paint, and this just has so many more features, so it's really good. You'll also see this one comes in a box, and the reason for that is it actually has a mouse. This is the Nintendo 64 mouse. This mouse is only used on 64DD games. I'm not sure which, but it may even only be this game. So that's quite interesting to know that there was a mouse on both the Super Nintendo and the Nintendo 64, and interestingly they were both used for the Mario Paint game. Down here we've got Talent Studio. So this game's all about sort of singing and recording and karaoke and that kind of stuff. And again, it comes in a box, and the reason for that is it comes with what they call the Nintendo 64 capture card. And what you've got here is basically a card that plugs into the cartridge slot of the Nintendo 64, and you can capture audio and video and also microphone input and actually record stuff that you produce in the game. So I thought it might be nice to examine the contents of each of these boxes, so we'll have a look and see what's inside. So if we look at the Mario Artist Paint Studio, inside we've got a copy of the game. Interestingly, this game here is still factory sealed. I'm not sure what I'm going to do there because I really want to play this game, but there's also not one part of me at all that wants to open this, so I'll probably leave that sealed for the time being. I've got a little information booklet here, and over here we've got the actual mouse itself. I might take that out of the packaging. So there you go, we have the Nintendo 64 mouse. It looks very nice. You can see it just plugs in as a normal Nintendo 64 controller. Got the original cable tie on there, which is very nice. And here's the mouse itself. You can see here you've got the Nintendo 64 logo there. Looks absolutely stunning. 2 click buttons there. If we flip it over, you can see some words underneath there. It's just a ball type mouse, very similar to the Super Nintendo mouse. Actually, that's not a bad idea. I'll compare it to the Super Nintendo mouse and we can see how they differ. So here we go, the 2 Nintendo mouses. So we've got the Super Nintendo mouse here and the Nintendo 64DD mouse here. You can see they're both ball type mouses. In fact, they're very similar. Other than the sort of designs, they're both, 2-button ball type mouses. Designs obviously quite different. Here you've got the 2 purple buttons and more of a square shape, whereas this looks much more like a computer mouse. Here you've just got the Nintendo logo, whereas here it's the Nintendo 64 logo. But yeah, 2 very nice mouses. The Super Nintendo mouse also came with a mouse pad if you bought it as part of the Mario Paint bundle, but there is no mouse pad as far as I'm aware for the Nintendo 64 mouse. So we can see if you had one of these, you could use that on there as well, which is very nice. So next up we've got Mario Artist Talent Studio, and you can see in here we've got a copy of the game. This one is not sealed, unlike the other one unfortunately, but that's alright, lets me play it at least. Then over here we've got some of the accessories. I might just unbox these so you can see what they are. So we've got some really cool stuff in here. So we've got the capture card, which I mentioned earlier, so you can see this just plugs into the Nintendo 64 as a cartridge. And up here you can see you've got video in, audio in, mic in. That's interesting. So maybe it's not actually to output video, but maybe it's actually to capture video that you can then use in the game to actually edit and mess around with, which is, again, just way ahead of its time. I haven't played around with this extensively, so I might have to do some more research into that, but that looks very cool. On top of that, you've also got another little instruction manual. You've got some stickers, and what these stickers are used for, you can see one's already been removed there. They're the edge stickers for the actual 64DD discs themselves. This one's already been applied. And over here, we've got one of the coolest things I've seen as an accessory. It's a little microphone. So I guess this is for doing voice recording and karaoke and stuff in the game. You can see here you've just got a standard 3.5mm jack, and this would actually plug in here, and that's how you would connect it up to actually use it in game. So that's very cool, very unconventional Nintendo accessories there, but again, this just goes to show how sort of novel this idea was. The third game is Polygon Studio, and this is basically a 3D creation tool for the Nintendo 64DD. And I think out of all the 64DD games, this one probably shows the power of the 64DD. You can do some absolutely amazing things in this game, and to see a fully fledged, 3D editor on the 64DD is just way ahead of its time. So this is a really cool game for the 64DD. And the final game isn't really a game. As you can see here, it shows all the other 3 games, and that's because this is the communication kit. And what you would do with this game is you would basically download and upload content made in the other 3 games online using the 64DD modem. So again, to think that there was online content sharing way back in the 90s is just incredible. It's so ahead of its time. So arguably the most well-known game on the 64DD is the F-Zero X expansion kit. For those of you who don't know, F-Zero X is a regular Nintendo 64 game. It's a racing game, and it's quite crazy. If you haven't played it, I really suggest you do. The best way I can describe it is futuristic racing. And what the F-Zero expansion kit did is it let you do a whole bunch of extra stuff in F-Zero X. This game is quite unique in that it is the only 64DD game where you actually have to put a normal Nintendo 64 game in the cartridge slot for it to work, and then it will sort of inject the extra content into the game. And some of this extra content involves things like a track editor and extra courses and stuff like that. And basically a lot of people who are familiar with the 64DD know it exists because of this game. I'm pretty sure the F-Zero community love this game. It adds some incredible features to F-Zero, and again, stuff that was way ahead of its time. So I've already mentioned this game a couple of times, but this is Doshin the Giant. This is a really weird game. They call it a god simulator, and basically the story behind it is you're a giant on this island who is effectively a god, and you have to keep the residents of the island happy or sad, and you get good or bad karma depending on how you look after them. As I said, really unusual game. The thing I find most unusual about this game is the packaging. I already mentioned before, when you bought the game, it came in this cardboard package. You can see there, that's Doshin the Giant. But it's also got this unusual sort of logo on it. And that's the same logo that's on the actual package of the game. What I found really unusual is that the actual Doshin the Giant himself, other than this sort of reference in the cardboard packaging, actually doesn't appear on the box at all. But perhaps what's most unusual about this, even more than the front cover, is the back cover. The back cover basically looks like an unfinished cover. As you can see, you've got 4 stock photos there that just say photo next to each of them, and that just seems so weird. Down here, I mean, as I said, I can't read Japanese, but all of these boxes say the same thing, so I'm not really sure what's going on there. But maybe in a rush to get this out to subscribers of the randnet service, they only did the front cover. But it's so weird to see. It doesn't look like it was meant to be released like that, so I'm really not sure what's going on there, and I haven't been able to find much out online. So the next game is quite an interesting one. We've got SimCity 64. SimCity is a pretty well-known game, but not a lot of people know that it was actually released for the Nintendo 64, obviously on 64DD. But yeah, there you go. It's also quite interesting because a lot of these games, on the back you'll see this same message where it says, for sale and use in Japan only, selling secondhand is not allowed, which means that in reality there's technically no proper way that someone in another country could ever obtain or play this game. But I don't think that would actually be enforced by law, since it's sitting here in my hand at the moment, but there you go. And the final game here, or game if you can call it that, is the randnet home disk, I guess you would call it, which is basically like the home menu, but you need a disk for it. And this just lets you, go online. As part of the randnet service, there was a whole online section, and it was basically like a bit of a primitive social media service, and this let you access that. What was interesting is that there was also a very rare accessory for the 64DD that was a keyboard, and this, I'm pretty sure, was the only game that used it, and you could use it to type in stuff on that social media service. So that's pretty cool. Unfortunately, you can't actually use much of the stuff on here anymore because the online service is long gone, and most of the stuff on this disc needs the online service. So this disc is basically a collector's item now. So there's one last thing I wanted to show you guys. Each randnet subscription came with a 64DD membership card, and the design was very similar to that of the artwork of the home menu disc. So when I bought my DD, I actually found the membership card was packaged away in here inside the Maryada communication kit. I don't think it usually comes in here. I think this is just where the previous owner left it. But you can see this is the membership card. Each subscriber to randnet would have got one of these. You can see it's got a very similar artwork to that disc there. And if we flip it over, you can see the membership IDs and names of the previous owners. You can see here that there are 3 listed. Now, I've done some research, and as far as I can tell, this is the only card I've ever seen where there's more than one member. And I believe the reason for this is because, if you had a family of 3 children, you could put all of their names on the membership card there. So luckily, this is an example of more than one member listed on a card, and I've not seen this before, so this is quite a unique membership card here. Very importantly, I'd like to give a shout out to my friend Bradley. He was the one who helped facilitate this purchase, and without him I would not have a 64DD, and I would not even know where to begin looking for one, so thanks a lot, Bradley. The only thing that you saw today that Brad didn't sell me was this F-Zero expansion kit. As you would have saw in my earlier video, I actually bought this in Japan. But Brad actually had one of these as well if I didn't have one, but I didn't need to buy it because I already had one. So Brad was definitely the saviour when it came to the 64DD. So thanks, Brad. So there you have it. That's the 64DD in a nutshell. I feel like I could go on for a long time about this, but this video must come to an end. If you have any questions, please feel free to post your question in a comment, and I'll get back to it as soon as I can. In the meantime, this has been nbduckman with Collector's Corner. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.